So picture this. 1 minute, I'm just scrolling through my usual nonsense on my phone, half distracted and trying not to burn my dinner. And the next thing I know, this random email pops up saying, "Congratulations, you've been selected to appear on Ultimate Couples Challenge." At first, I thought it was spam or some sort of weird prank. I mean, who actually gets picked for a game show out of the blue, right? But then I looked over at Kyle, my boyfriend, who was just chilling on the couch, and I figured, why the hell not? Maybe this was our chance for a little adventure, even if it was totally out of the blue. Kyle's the kind of guy who's always up for something new. He's got this infectious grin that somehow makes even the dumbest ideas sound like a brilliant plan. We've been together for almost 3 years, living in this tiny apartment in the city that's way too small for two people who both work from home. Our relationship is pretty low-key, mostly Netflix marathons, bad takeout, and the occasional argument about who left the dishes in the sink. Honestly, not exactly reality TV material, but apparently the producers thought otherwise. So we filled out the forms, did the virtual interviews, and before we knew it, we were on a flight to this completely random location that felt like a mix between a summer camp and an obstacle course nightmare. The whole setup was wild. Think ropes, mud pits, puzzles, and a bunch of cameras lurking everywhere, catching every awkward moment and every time Kyle nearly face-planted trying to climb a wall. The thing is, the show's premise was simple but brutal. Couples Challenge meant we had to prove how well we worked together under pressure. No script, no safety net, just us, the cameras, and a whole lot of ridiculous tasks designed to test everything from teamwork to trust, and maybe, if we were lucky, our patience with each other. I won't lie, the first day was a mess. Kyle's competitive streak kicked in hard, and I swear, he gets this look in his eyes when he's determined that's part serious sports mode, part mischievous kid who's just found the cheat codes. Meanwhile, I'm trying to keep my balance, remember the instructions, and not embarrass myself in front of a national audience. The crew kept saying we had good chemistry, which I guess was their way of encouraging us, but honestly, all I could think about was how weird it was to be doing this whole thing in front of strangers, when I'd usually just be sitting on my couch with Kyle, eating pizza and complaining about work. But here's the kicker. Just when I thought the whole thing was some cosmic joke, something changed. There was this moment during one of the challenges, some ridiculous timed puzzle involving giant foam blocks and a lot of yelling, where Kyle reached out, grabbed my hand, and just squeezed it like I was the only person in the world who mattered. No cameras, no game, just us. And in that second, everything got real. I realized this wasn't just about winning some stupid prize or looking good on TV. It was about us, figuring out how to be a team when everything around us felt like chaos. That moment stuck with me, more than any prize money or fancy trophy ever could. But we still had so much ahead. Challenges that tested us in ways I didn't expect, secrets from our past bubbling up, and some seriously intense moments that made me question if we were really ready for all this. So yeah, that's where we were. Two guys thrown into a crazy game show neither of us signed up for, trying to figure out if love really could survive a couples challenge. And honestly, I have no idea what's coming next. But I do know one thing. This ride was just getting started. What happened next felt like the ultimate test, not just of our teamwork, but of everything we thought we knew about each other. After that hand squeeze during the foam block puzzle, I'd hoped the vibe between us would stay solid, maybe even get stronger. Instead, the very next challenge felt like it was designed to expose every little crack we'd been ignoring. We were told to head to this small lake for a trust exercise. The setup was weirdly minimalist. Just a raft, a blindfold, and one rule. One partner had to navigate the raft across the lake while blindfolded, guided only by the other partner's voice. Seemed simple enough on paper, but trust me, in practice, it was a nightmare. Kyle was picked to be blindfolded first, and honestly, I was feeling confident. I mean, we'd been through a lot together. How hard could shouting directions across a pond be? So I hopped on the shore, ready to be the voice. But then he closed his eyes, and just the way he did it, like he was surrendering completely, hit me in the chest. For a second, the noise of the crew, the cameras, even the other couples, faded away. It was just me and him, and I had to be clear, calm, and reliable. Something I wasn't always great at, especially when I got nervous. I started giving directions. Little left. No. A bit more steady. You're doing great. But then the raft bumped against a floating log, and Kyle's grip tightened on the edges. His voice cracked a little when he asked, "Am I close? Am I doing this right?" And that's when the panic kicked in, because I realized I wasn't just a guide here. I was supposed to be his anchor. But instead, I felt like I was the one drifting. My directions got sloppy, my voice shakier. I could tell Kyle was starting to doubt me. And suddenly, it wasn't just about the raft anymore. It was about us. When the raft finally made it to the other side, safe but late, Kyle took off his blindfold and we both just stood there, breathing hard, the weight of the moment hanging between us. He gave me this look, half frustrated, half relieved, and said, "You weren't exactly calm back there." I wanted to argue or make a joke to break the tension, but all I could do was shrug and say, "Yeah, well, turns out I'm better at watching Netflix than giving directions under pressure." He laughed, but it was a short laugh, the kind that doesn't quite mask when something's off. And from that moment on, I started noticing how the challenges weren't just physical. They were digging into us emotionally, peeling back layers I didn't even realize were there. The next day was even tougher. We had this endurance test that involved being tied together at the wrists and navigating an obstacle course. The catch? We couldn't speak. No words, just gestures and expressions. It felt like a cruel joke, because Kyle and I are kind of talkers. We process everything by talking it out, even if it's dumb stuff. Taking that away felt like losing our main way to connect. I remember stumbling through the first few obstacles, almost pulling the rope too tight, and Kyle shooting me one of those looks that said, "Really?" But then, something shifted. We started syncing up without words. A nudge here, a squeeze there, a shared glance that somehow said, "I've got you." And it felt kind of amazing. After we crossed the finish line, breathless and covered in dirt, Kyle turned to me and said quietly, "Maybe we don't always need words." That stuck with me longer than the muddy clothes and aching muscles. Because when you're used to processing everything verbally, learning to communicate in silence is like discovering a new language, one that's raw and real in a way words sometimes aren't. But of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when the pressure got to us. Like during one of the mental challenges, where we had to solve a puzzle under a crazy time limit while being distracted by all kinds of noises and chaos around us. Kyle got frustrated when I misinterpreted a clue, and I could see the tension snap in his jaw. We barely spoke on the walk back to camp that evening. That night, sitting under the stars, I finally broke the silence. "Hey, I know I messed up earlier. I'm sorry." Kyle looked over at me, eyes reflecting the little campfire. "Yeah, me too. This whole thing, it's harder than I thought." But maybe that's the point. We didn't say much after that, but sitting there with him felt like a small reset. Despite the stress and the weirdness of being on a reality show that was basically designed to push us to our limits, there was this undercurrent of something stronger. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, we could come out of this not just as a team on a show, but as a better version of ourselves. The days that followed threw even more curveballs at us, physical challenges that left us bruised and sore, surprising alliances with other couples, and moments where the cameras caught us at our most vulnerable, our most real. I'll never forget the weird mix of exhaustion and adrenaline as Kyle and I crossed the finish line of the final challenge, covered in sweat and mud, laughing like idiots who'd just survived the craziest roller coaster of their lives. But the real prize wasn't the prize money or the trophies. It was everything in between: the fights, the apologies, the quiet moments of understanding, and that hand squeeze during the foam block puzzle that started it all. Looking back, I don't think we ever expected to be chosen for a game show. And honestly, I don't think either of us realized how much we'd learn about ourselves and each other until we were right in the middle of it. It was messy, weird, exhausting, and sometimes downright humiliating. But it was ours, and as the cameras finally stopped rolling and the crowds faded away, I found myself thinking, maybe this crazy, unexpected adventure was exactly what we needed all along. When the final challenge wrapped up and the cameras finally started packing up, I thought all the adrenaline and spotlight would fade fast, but it didn't. Somehow, being on that show, exposed, challenged, and all kinds of raw, shifted something inside me. I mean, Kyle and I had been together for a while, but this experience felt like peeling back layers we hadn't even known were there. The day after the finale, we got a little downtime before the big wrap party. The producers set up a casual hangout spot near the lake, with picnic tables and string lights. It was low-key, but after all the chaos of the past week, it felt like a breath of fresh air. I was sitting beside Kyle, watching some of the other couples joke and swap stories, when he nudged me. "You know," he said, "I wasn't sure we'd make it through all this without driving each other crazy." I snorted. "Yeah, me neither. I was ready to tap out after the raft thing." He smiled, eyes softer than usual. "But we didn't. We actually got better," I nodded. "We did. And I think it's because we had to listen differently. Like during that silent obstacle course. You showed me there's more to understanding than just words." Kyle's hand found mine under the table, fingers lacing together naturally. I guess all those years binge-watching crime shows and arguing over pizza toppings finally paid off. We laughed, but there was a comfort in that moment, something steady and real. It wasn't just the game or the competition that mattered anymore. It was us, outside the spotlight, figuring out how to be a couple in the messiness of real life. Later, as the sun started dipping below the horizon, we wandered away from the group. I could feel the tension and excitement from the day settling into quiet reflection. Kyle stopped by the water's edge, kicking a small stone into the lake. "Hey," he said, turning to me, "what if this isn't just some crazy reality show thing? What if it's a new beginning?" I looked at him, heart thudding in a way that had nothing to do with the physical challenges. "You mean, like, us? For real?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, this experience, it's made me realize how much I want to keep building with you, even when things get messy." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that honesty. Because yeah, things were messy. We weren't perfect. We argued, we got frustrated, and sometimes we stumbled. But beneath it all was something I hadn't always been brave enough to say out loud. I wanted to keep choosing him every day. "Me too," I said finally. "I want that too." We stayed there for a while, just talking about the future. Not the scripted kind, not the game show version, but the real one. What it might look like when the cameras were gone, when the challenges weren't designed to push us to our limits, but when life just threw its usual curveballs. The next couple of days blurred together. We went through the usual post-show interviews, awkward selfies with fans, and a million questions about how we managed to stay sane through it all. But in between the hype, Kyle and I were quietly planning. A small dinner when we got home, a weekend trip somewhere just for us, and conversations about what we really wanted next. Then came the surprise moment no one expected. The producers invited us back for a special reunion episode a few weeks later. They wanted us to come back, not as competitors, but to share what the whole experience had meant. We hesitated at first. Going back into that intense public world felt a little overwhelming, but in the end, we agreed. Because by then, we knew this story wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about showing up, flaws and all. On reunion night, sitting under those bright studio lights, Kyle squeezed my hand again. "Ready for round two?" I smiled, feeling a steadiness I hadn't felt before. "Yeah, let's do this." Together. And as the cameras rolled, capturing every laugh, every eye roll, every honest moment between us, I realized something important. This wasn't just a game show. It was a chapter in our story, one that proved love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other, even when the challenges get messy. And sometimes, especially then. Walking off the stage that night, hand in hand with Kyle, I felt something I hadn't expected when that random email first landed in my inbox. Hope. Hope that whatever came next, we could face it. Not as contestants on a show, but as a team, in the real, unpredictable game of life. After the reunion episode wrapped, things settled back into our usual rhythm, but with a twist. Suddenly, people recognized us on the street or in the coffee shop, sometimes asking for advice about relationships or just telling us they loved watching us on the show. It was surreal. Kyle handled the attention with that laid-back charm of his, cracking jokes and making friends wherever we went. Me? I was still awkwardly trying to figure out how to answer, "So, were you guys really that competitive?" without sounding like a total dork. But beneath all the buzz, there was this quiet undercurrent between us, like the show had opened a door we weren't sure we'd want to close again. We'd spent so much time in that bubble of challenges and cameras that stepping back felt strange. It was like the ordinary world was waiting for us to jump back in, but we had changed. One evening, a few weeks after the reunion aired, Kyle and I found ourselves on our tiny balcony, sharing a cheap bottle of wine and watching the city lights flicker below. The air was cool, and the usual city noise hummed around us, but between us, there was this feeling of calm that I hadn't known was possible after all the chaos. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't gotten picked for the show?" Kyle asked, swirling the wine in his glass. I thought about that for a moment. Honestly, I think we'd still be happy, but maybe a little stuck. We'd be in the same routines, same arguments over who forgot to take out the trash. This whole experience shook things up. He nodded, eyes fixed on the skyline. Yeah, it forced us to communicate differently, to trust more. Not just the easy stuff, but the messy, uncomfortable stuff too. I reached over and took his hand. That's what makes it real, right? Not the perfect moments, but the ones where we don't have a choice. But to be honest, Kyle squeezed my hand, a quiet smile playing on his lips. Exactly. And funny enough, I think that's what people connected with watching us. Not some flawless couple, but two guys figuring it out, flaws and all. We sat there for a while, just holding on to each other and the night. But as much as the show had brought us closer, it also unwrapped parts of ourselves that needed work. I started thinking about how much I'd been holding back, not just in the game, but in everyday life. How easy it was to fall into routines and avoid the deeper conversations because they were scary or vulnerable. Then one night, a few days later, Kyle dropped a bombshell that caught me off guard. We were making dinner, him chopping vegetables, and me trying not to burn the garlic, when he suddenly looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen in a while. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what comes next. After all this, I want to do more than just survive the challenges. I want us to build something bigger." I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "What do you mean?" Kyle took a deep breath. "Maybe it's time we talked about moving in somewhere bigger. Somewhere that feels like home, not just a stopgap. And maybe thinking about the next step, you know? Like, seriously." I blinked. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than any puzzle or obstacle course we'd faced. "Seriously, as in?" I asked, heart pounding. He smiled, the kind of smile that was both nervous and hopeful. "You know, us building a life together, maybe even thinking about marriage? I'm not saying tomorrow, but maybe sometime." I felt my throat tighten. The thought had crossed my mind before, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. Scary, yes, but also exciting. Because if the show taught me anything, it was that we weren't just good at surviving challenges. We were good at growing through them. "Are you serious?" I finally managed, a grin breaking through the nerves. "Dead serious," he said, stepping closer. "But only if you want it too. No pressure." I reached up, cupping his face. "Kyle, I want that more than anything. I think this show was just the start of something way bigger." He leaned into my hand, eyes shining with something I couldn't quite put into words. Hope, love, maybe even a little fear mixed with a whole lot of trust. That night, as we sat on the floor of our tiny kitchen, surrounded by the chaos of half-cooked food and unwashed dishes, we talked for hours. About fears, dreams, what we wanted from life and from each other. We weren't perfect, and we didn't have a blueprint. But we had each other, and for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of apartment hunting, imagining a future that felt both thrilling and terrifying. We visited places that felt too big, too expensive, or just plain wrong. But every step brought us closer, not just physically, but emotionally. One afternoon, after a long day of searching, we ended up at a little cafe on the other side of town, exhausted and ready to call it quits. We sat across from each other, sipping coffee, when Kyle reached across the table and took my hand. "Hey," he said, "whatever happens, I want you to know. This whole crazy journey, I wouldn't trade it for anything. You're my person." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a lump in my throat. "You're mine too." And just like that, the fear of the unknown didn't seem so scary anymore. Because no matter what challenges came our way, on some game show or in real life, I knew we'd face them together. We'd been chosen for a couples challenge, sure. But in the end, we chose each other. And that was the real victory. After that cafe conversation, things started moving in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. We found a small 2-bedroom apartment that wasn't perfect, but it had big windows and a balcony that caught the afternoon sun just right. Walking through it with Kyle, I remember feeling this strange mix of excitement and nerves, as if stepping into a new chapter without knowing if the pages would be smooth or full of twists. Kyle was already imagining how he'd rearrange the living room, where the couch would go, what color the walls should be. I was more focused on the practical stuff, the lease, the budget, how we'd manage our furniture situation since we basically owned 2 couches and 3 mismatched dining chairs between us. But the best part was seeing the look on his face when he talked about turning this place into our home. It was the kind of hope I hadn't realized I needed. Moving day was a chaotic blur of boxes, takeout containers, and way too much coffee. We joked about how it felt like the final challenge on the show, only instead of foam blocks and mud, we were wrestling with IKEA furniture and trying not to kill each other over assembly instructions. But every time I caught Kyle's eye, laughing at some ridiculous mishap or sharing a smile over a shared victory, I felt like we were building something real, something that had nothing to do with cameras or competition. One night, a couple weeks after we'd settled in, Kyle and I were sprawled on the floor of the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the soft glow of fairy lights we'd hung around the window. The city was alive outside, but inside it just felt like us, messy, imperfect, but ours. "I never thought moving in together would be like this," Kyle said, popping the cap off a beer and handing it to me. I laughed. "What, you mean the arguing over where to put the damn lamp?" "Exactly," he said, grinning. "But honestly, it's kind of perfect." I took a sip and nodded. "Yeah, it is. It's us." Then, out of nowhere, Kyle got quiet. I looked over to see him staring at the floor, fingers tracing a pattern on the carpet like he was trying to find the right words. "Hey," I said softly, nudging him with my shoulder. "What's up?" He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the show, about how much it changed us, and how much I want to keep growing with you, but also about the stuff we didn't talk about, the stuff we pushed aside because it was easier." I felt my stomach tighten. We had skimmed over some big things during the show. Fears, insecurities, the kind of doubts that don't fit neatly into a challenge or puzzle, but sneak into every relationship. "Like what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Kyle looked up, meeting my eyes. "Like how sometimes I worry I'm not enough, that I'm too intense or too stubborn, and how I've been scared you might get tired of that." I reached out, cupping his face. "Kyle, no one's perfect. Not me, not you, but I'm in this because I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, relief washing over his features. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere either." That night we stayed up late, talking about everything we'd been keeping inside, the fears of being vulnerable, the times we'd held back, the dreams we hadn't shared yet. It was messy and emotional, but it felt like the deepest kind of connection I'd ever experienced. Like we were laying the foundation for something that wasn't just about surviving challenges, but about truly living together. The weeks that followed were full of little moments that piled up into something bigger. Sunday mornings with burnt coffee and lazy cartoons, arguing over which pizza to order, and those quiet evenings where we just sat side by side, no need for words. But life, as it tends to do, threw a curveball. Kyle's job started demanding more hours, and suddenly our carefully built balance was wobbling. He was exhausted, stressed, and the distance between us crept in like an uninvited guest. One night, after a long day, I found him sprawled on the couch, staring blankly at his laptop. I sat beside him, sliding my hand into his. "Hey," I said gently. "Talk to me." He sighed, rubbing his face. "I don't know how to do this anymore. Work's killing me, and I feel like I'm dragging you down with me." I shook my head. "You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm here. We're in this together." He looked at me then, eyes shining with exhaustion and something softer. "Hope. I know," he whispered, "but I'm scared. Scared I'm going to mess this up." I pulled him close, resting my head on his shoulder. "We're not perfect, Kyle, but that's okay. We'll figure it out, like we always do." And we did. It wasn't easy. There were more late nights, more tough conversations, and days when it felt like we were barely hanging on. But beneath it all was this steady, stubborn kind of love. The kind that showed up not just in the big moments on a game show, but in the quiet, messy parts of everyday life. Looking back now, it's wild to think how a random email led us here, from strangers selected for a crazy couples challenge to partners building a life that's theirs, imperfect and beautiful in all its chaos. We didn't win some grand prize, but we won something better, a real shot at forever, whatever that looks like. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that for anything. Months had passed since those tough nights, and slowly but surely, Kyle and I found our rhythm again. It wasn't some instant fix or magical turnaround. It was a series of small, everyday choices to show up for each other, even when things felt hard or uncertain. And in that, I realized something important. Love isn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about commitment, patience, and a willingness to keep trying, even when it's messy. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Kyle surprised me by pulling out an old photo album he'd found while unpacking. We flipped through pictures from our time on the show. The muddy faces, the sweaty high fives, the moments where we laughed through exhaustion. We both smiled, remembering how far we'd come. "Remember this one?" Kyle said, pointing to a photo where we were covered in mud, grinning like idiots after finishing a brutal obstacle. I laughed. "How could I forget? I think that's the day I seriously considered quitting." "Yeah," he said softly, "but you didn't. You stayed." We stayed. There was something so simple and yet profound in that moment. We hadn't just survived the game show, we'd survived life's ups and downs together. And that felt like a victory far bigger than any prize. Later, as we stood on our balcony watching the city lights twinkle below, Kyle slipped his hand into mine, his fingers finding their familiar place. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly, "but I know I want to face it with you." My heart swelled. Me too. No fancy speeches, no grand gestures, just two people choosing each other, again and again. And that, after everything, was the real win. Because love isn't a challenge to be conquered or a game to be won. It's the everyday moments, the honest conversations, the shared silences, and the hands held tight when the world feels overwhelming. And in those moments, I knew we were home.